Hi everyone. In this video lecture, we're going to be talking about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are one of the types of biological macromolecules. So these are large biological molecules, and other types would include proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. But we're going to be talking about carbohydrates today. And I think everyone has a sort of intuitive idea of what carbohydrates are based on carbs that we eat in our diet. But in this video, we're going to be taking a little bit of a closer look at the structure of carbohydrates and the different kinds and what they're used for. So, we're starting with the most basic kind of carbohydrate, and that's a simple sugar called a monosaccharide. And monosaccharides are this prefix mono means one, so it's one sugar, so just a single sugar molecule. They're used to build every other kind of carbohydrate that we'll be talking about. So they're sort of the building blocks that we'll use to connect together to make other kinds of sugars, other kinds of carbohydrates. They all have the same formula molecularly, so C6H12O6, and that means they've got 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. And you can see that they're all arranged in sort of this ring hexagon form. So all of these monosaccharides are just one ring, one hexagon. So we have one other kind of simple sugar to talk about, and these are called disaccharides. So maybe you can guess by this prefix, di means two. So this is a two sugar molecule. And you make them by linking together two of the monosaccharides. So this picture is showing you're basically just sort of gluing or pasting them together, and then you get this structure that's where you've got two rings instead of just one. And this two ring is a disaccharide. So we have different kinds of disaccharides. Sucrose is one example where you join together the monosaccharide glucose and the monosaccharide fructose. And if you put them together, you get the molecule sucrose, which is basically just table sugar. Lactose you get by joining two molecules, galactose and glucose, and this is found in milk. And then maltose is glucose, two glucose molecules together. So monosaccharides, one single sugar ring, one single sugar molecule. Disaccharides are made by two monosaccharides put together. Both of these simple sugars, so monosaccharides and disaccharides, are a source of quick energy for organisms to use. So, if we need energy right away, simple sugars are going to be where that comes from. So, if you ever know somebody who gets like a sugar rush after eating a lot of candy, that makes sense in the sense of sugars being used for quick energy. The main thing is that organisms are going to be breaking down glucose in particular. And remember, glucose is one of those monosaccharides. So, glucose in particular is going to be used in the process of cellular respiration. And that's going to be the focus of our next video. But this process of cellular respiration is going to transform glucose into energy that the cell is actually going to be using, which is called ATP. And that's going to be giving the cells all the energy they need to do whatever kinds of processes they need. So, sugars are used for sort of the things you would think of using energy for, like growing up and moving around, but also the things your cells need to do that take energy. So, when we talked about active transport, moving molecules against their concentration gradient, we said that process requires energy. And that energy is going to come in the form of ATP for the cell. And this ATP is ultimately going to be created by breaking down glucose through cellular respiration. Okay, we also have more complex sugars, which are also called polysaccharides. So, this one, poly, the prefix means many. So, this is many sugars. So, polysaccharides are hundreds of connected molecules. And in particular, again, this molecule glucose is going to be the main thing that we're using here. So, these polysaccharides all have different sort of shapes, different forms, but it's essentially just a bunch of the same molecule, a bunch of just glucose connected to other glucose molecules. So big, long chains of glucose. Like I said, they have different branching patterns. So without getting into the specifics over here, you can see that there's sort of a lightly branched one here, there's a really branched one down here, and then there's sort of these straight chains down here. So different patterns, but the same molecule is making up all of those chains. And there are a few different functions for complex sugars that are different than for simple sugars. So, one is for energy storage. Starch and glycogen are the two main ones for this. And the idea with this is that if we eat a meal that has a lot of sugar and you have a lot of sugar in your bloodstream, your body might store some of that sugar, particularly in your liver and in your muscles, so that if later you need some glucose and you haven't eaten in a while, then you can sort of chop it up a little bit, break off some of the glucose that's stored, and use that as a source of energy. So we use glycogen as our storage for glucose molecules, but plants often use starch instead. So again, it's the same idea, just a bunch of glucoses strung together. The branching pattern is just a little different. Um, you could see this in potatoes, in unripe bananas, have a lot of starch. So they have special sort of little storage granules where they stockpile all of this starch or stored glucose. The other important thing that polysaccharides do are structural support. So, cell walls are often made of polysaccharides, and that could be cellulose in plant cells or chitin in fungal cells. And here you can see glucoses strung together in straight chains, and that's how plant cell walls get their structural rigidity. And then the last slide, I just wanted to talk about how organisms are getting these sugars. So we've talked about the importance of simple sugars and complex sugars, and especially glucose as a really important molecule for storing energy, for structural support, and for going through that process called cellular respiration. And so just remember that autotrophs, so this is going to be organisms that are making their own sugar, so building their own sugars, often through the process of photosynthesis. So taking in carbon dioxide, taking in water, and using sunlight to build sugars. And then heterotrophs, which would include animals and also fungi that are sort of breaking down their food, are going to consume and digest other organisms, and that's going or other organisms or dead stuff essentially, and that's going to give them um, access to nutrients, including sugars. So autotrophs are making their own sugars. Heterotrophs are getting it from the food they eat. And I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk about the process of cellular respiration in more detail.